Yeah, we can start. Hi. Welcome, everyone. My name is Aaron Vermeulen. I'm the head of global finance for WF International. Welcome to the session. I've been told that this is the busiest days in terms of panels, so there's quite a lot of competition, but thanks for coming, and there are also people online, so that's also good to know. So before I introduce the panel, I would like to set the context a little bit. So in this panel, we will talk about the role finance sector can play in transitioning the economy to net zero and nature positive, and the role of blended finance can play in this. As you might have seen at COP26 2 years ago, we had the launch of the Glasgow Financial Alliance to Net Zero, which was set up by Mark Carney and Michael Bloomberg. 500 financial institutions signed up to that, with over 130 trillion assets under management, committing to develop net zero transition plans voluntarily. But also regulators are starting to pay attention to net zero and transition plans. The European Bank, ECB, has indicated that they will start focusing on climate disclosure and mitigating climate risk for financial institutions. You might have seen Frank Alderson fuming in the newspaper and threatening with fines to European financial institutions if they're not disclosing and taking action. And also at the European level, there are plans in the making where transition is a part of the supervisory review and evaluation process. So there's a lot of things happening. But thankfully, this group of GFANs has already started developing transition plans on their own, voluntarily. But what I keep hearing from the alliances, so the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, the Net Zero Banking Alliance, is that the real economy is not moving at the speed with which they have set their transition plans. So there's a risk of divergence between their ambitions and the real economy. So what we want to talk today about today is how can these financial instruments influence the real economy and nudge their investees so they are aligned with these transition plans towards net zero and nature positive. And it's great to see, we just had a discussion on that, Jason. It's great to see that mainstream investors like Larry Fink of BlackRock, he mentioned 2 days ago that the financial system is not ready to deploy finance to the global south, which is needed for net zero and nature positive. And it was really, well, of course, you hear about the finance gaps worldwide, but it was really inspiring that a guy like Larry Fink was talking about blended finance. So it has come out of the space from NGOs, development banks, and now also mainstream banks, asset managers, asset owners are looking at blended finance. So for the newcomers, so what is blended finance? Blended finance is an approach to mobilize more private investment to net zero and nature positive using de-risking instruments and concessional finance. But blended finance is not at the scale where it needs to be. You might have seen a convergence report indicating that the total volume of blended finance has halved by over 22 compared to 21. And it's still in the order of tens of billions and not in the order of 100 billions and the trillions that we need. So what do we need to supercharge this really promising instrument to really speak to the world of the mainstream investors? So what we want to talk about today is what role can blended finance play in ambitious transition plans for financial companies? What are the enablers and blockers to make blended finance work? And that's why it's in the Panda Pavilion. How can it be deployed for companies with business models contributing to nature positive? Nature is very relevant for mitigation and adaptation, so if it is integrated in transition plans of companies, hopefully we can drive some money to nature positive action. So that's the context. And with that, I would like to give the floor to my great panelists. So Jason, maybe we can start with you. Just introduce yourself, what company you're working for, and then I'll move to the questions, yeah?
Great. Jason Spenceley with the Global Environment Facility, the GEF. It's a real pleasure to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
And good afternoon, I'm Reshma Shah. I'm the Group Director for Sustainability at Equity Group. which is the largest financial institution in East and Central Africa.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Ofosuhina Wise, and I'm with the Business for Nature Coalition, which is a coalition of around 85 plus business organizations, some NGOs, and also the scientific community working to speed and scale up business action and also help influence ambitious policies on nature. Yeah, happy to be here.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Parham. I'm the Director of Programs and Partnerships for the Lightsmith Group. The Lightsmith Group is the operator of the Craft Fund, which is the first private equity investment firm focused exclusively on climate adaptation and resilience technologies.
Thank you, Brian. So, Michael, I would like to start with you and talk a little bit about transition planning and why corporate climate transition planning is important and what does it include. But also maybe you can touch a little bit what is the role of nature in these transition plans to net zero and climate resilience.
Thank you very much. It's a sort of double-layered question. But I think for us to begin about transitioning planning, we should have a general conversation about what we're transitioning towards, right? I think the whole idea is about the fact that we need to move from the current system of unsustainable practices towards addressing the crises of climate change, which means meeting that 1.5 degree target and addressing the net zero goal. Also working towards halting and reversing nature loss, nature and biodiversity loss by 2030, contributing to the goals of the global biodiversity framework and nature, getting towards a nature positive future. And thirdly, of course, working towards building social equity and social equality. So transition planning essentially is around aligning your business flows, your operations, the financial flows to make sure that your business is working towards those goals, right? And essentially, so coming to the next part of your question is what that entails. What we're working with businesses is to take them through a process of wealth, first starting by understanding their relationship with nature. Companies need to understand that their businesses or their operations do not only rely and depend on nature, but also has impacts on nature and on climate. So really understanding the relationship with nature is the basis, and the accounting of that really forms the basis for setting the right types of targets and also driving the right types of actions and essentially also getting the right types of financing in to help accelerate the action towards a nature positive future. Now, in transition planning, we know that the role of nature is crucial, especially when we're talking about climate. It's very clear that there is no net zero without nature. We are not going to hit that 1.5 degree target without the role of nature. Nature has the capacity and the potential to address about 30% of the solutions that is needed to get us to that goal. Currently, I think, the finance experts are here, but we don't have up to 10% of the financing going into these natural climate solutions. And that is where we see the huge gap that we need to fill. So nature has the ability to, of course, help with the sequestration, help to increase avoided emissions, and not even to talk about the co-benefits that it has to the people, to indigenous communities, to building resilience, and to providing healthy, not ecosystems, but also healthy lives. So I think bringing all of that together, that is sort of the reason and the justification why it is important for any credible transition plan to make sure that it's addressing the climate crisis, nature and biodiversity loss, and very importantly also the people element.
Thank you, Michael. And what is Business for Nature doing to foster that transition at the corporate level?
I was saving this for later, but happy to talk about that already. We are working together with our network of partners and businesses, and we've already started a campaign which we launched in November and also amplified in an event here yesterday called Now for Nature. Now for Nature is a global campaign that is really working with businesses to develop and publish credible nature strategies. So we worked to develop what we're calling the Nature Strategy Handbook that guides companies specifically on how to assess their impacts, dependencies, risks, and opportunities with specific questions, guiding questions, recommendations, and also resources on actually how to do this. The handbook is guiding companies through this, and the campaign is going to basically be a reflection of the number of companies that have been able to go through this process, submitted their nature strategies, and we'll be amplifying that through a campaign website between now and 2030. The idea is to keep growing the number of companies that are on this journey of making sure that climate and nature are at the forefront of decision making within their companies. And happy to elaborate more
Thanks,
on that.
Michael. Yep. Thanks so much. Jason, over to you. A little bit more about blended finance. Maybe you can introduce the topic a little bit more for the ones that are not engaged so much, and what it does for nature, and why it is important. Why is it important in the whole climate transition space?
Okay, thank you. And again, thanks a lot for this invitation to be here. Look, in my calculation of the ebb and flow, that is COP28, we're in the middle afternoon. This is exactly the middle afternoon of the COP. And I think that's really appropriate and good foresight of WWF to hold a panel on blended finance for nature and nature's value to both net zero as well as climate resilience. Because in my view, blended finance for nature is central to our solutions, to our transition to net zero and to resilience. Why? Why do I think that's central? Well, first is the scale of the financing gaps that we have for net zero, for climate resilience, and for nature itself. Like, it's staggering. The numbers just recently, 2 weeks ago, the UNEP Adaptation Gap report came out saying that $387 billion is the latest figure, is just our climate adaptation gap per year, just in developing countries. How can we come close to achieving that? I think your number was generous, that we're getting to 10% of financing, the 10% of the solutions. So how can we do that if we don't, how can we achieve the scale of transition if we don't really purposefully and really strategic use the finite resource that is public finance to catalyze the larger scale transition from all sectors of society, all types of business, call it the private sector and all its diversity. We have to be really strategic about doing that. And despite all the concern I have when I see my kids every day and I think about the world that they're growing up in and everybody's kids and nieces and nephews are growing up in, I'm an optimist. And so I see three opportunities or three positivities, three reasons for some hope. One is the concentric circles of nature, net zero or mitigation, and adaptation and resilience are coming together. It's an age-old wisdom that we've known for millennia, but it's coming together in policy forums. It's science-based, private capital knows it, and finally the human construct, which is the climate conventions, are moving in this direction. That gives me hope because that can drive blended finance and private capital. The second thing that gives me hope is that we're growing our sophistication on the business of nature and the business of resilience and net zero. Brian's gonna talk about this more, I hope, in a moment. We're understanding the motivations of the private sector to invest and how public finance, this gets to what is blended finance, how public finance can create the risk and reward environment that private capital needs. It's about supply chain resilience motivation. It's about the goods and services that are nature, net zero, and resilience oriented. And the green zone just, a few hundred meters down is full of businesses that I would call nature businesses, biodiversity businesses, adaptation, resilience businesses, and net zero businesses. And finally, it's about the investment opportunity, something else that colleagues will be speaking about, because this creates, and BlackRock, I was at a dinner last night with BlackRock, the big boys, the real money, and they were saying, we see a boom in investment coming up for the nature and the resilience economy. in the end, there's going to be massive impact to GDP, but we see a lot of business opportunity growth. So that gives me hope. And the third piece of hope is the growing models of blended finance, how we go about doing it, using very precious multilateral finance, whether it's from the GEF or other sources of public finance, to transition the insurance sector, to help de-risk and create investment funds with private equity investors investing in nature, resilience, and net zero business opportunities. SME incubation and acceleration, we're getting increasingly sophisticated at it, at our metrics as well. So, gives me hope. I'd love to talk more about models of promising points of light that we need to scale up. Thanks.
Jason, to make the audience as enthusiastic as you are about blended finance, can you give one example of what Jeff is doing on blended finance?
One of the great examples, I don't want to take away Brian's steam, but one is an early investment we did in the Craft Fund. We just invested $1 million, but okay, just $1 million, but $1 million, it's now capitalized at 187, it's probably more this week, of blended finance. And that's creating a wave. It's inspiring and it's creating a wave. That's one. Another is with WWF, with the insurance sector in challenging environments, in Pacific Islands, in Melanesia, creating an insurance sector for nature-based assets, for the resilience value that provides to people. Challenging environment, but it's another model that I love, and thanks to Dave McCauley back there who helped generate the idea behind that.
All right, thanks, Jason. Well, let's move to the banks and the investors now. Reshma, I'm really happy that you're here. What I hear when it comes to blended finance, it's really hard to crowd the southern banks in. It's in many cases it's banks from the global north that are co-financing blended finance deals. So can you explain a little bit what your organization is doing to deploy blended finance instruments in Kenya and around?
Thanks for that, and hello everyone again. So with Equity Bank, I mean, I'll just give a bit of background on Equity itself. Its vision is about lives and livelihood, so that's really where we start. It's about people. And a lot of the times when we talk about nature, we talk about climate to our clients, they just look at us and they're like, it's about survival for us. We have a large SME base. About 50% of our 18 million customers are SMEs. And we did a survey about what matters to them. And what matters to them is, one, their businesses, getting the financing at the right term and the right period and at the right cost. So that's the challenge we're facing. We understand the risks that we're dealing with, but we need to help our clients understand the risks that they're dealing with. And they're not coming to us and they're saying, we want sustainable finance products. That's not what they're saying to us. It's for us to be able to put the products forward in a way that actually helps them. So what are we doing about it? I mean, we have a very strong foundation, the Equity Group Foundation, and we use that foundation in terms of capacity building. We use that foundation. We have about 300 agronomists that sit in the foundation in all our key branches that help with areas like regenerative farming. We do aspects about energy, environment, helping schools convert so that from the age of young children, they can start understanding and relating to climate and nature. And then they take that home. The household level starts converting at that level, and that takes it through to the businesses. But what we're trying to do is say, okay, if the key thing here is the length of the loan and the cost of the loan, then how can we use climate and nature to actually bring that cost down? How can we use our lending procedures, our credit procedures, to help the businesses really understand? So we've embedded a very intensive environmental and social due diligence that we do. And the idea of all of that is we share those details with our clients. The details, any mitigations that are agreed, go as part of the facility agreement, and then we track that through the whole life cycle of the loan. We then actively go out there to seek concessional money and we actively go out there to seek loan guarantees and other aspects that we can then embed within those products. So clients start to understand, number one, I'm high risk. If there's a way I can reduce my risk, I'm going to get better terms here. And by doing that, it's actually helping that business develop. So as an example, we at this corp launched a product called Acrofim, which was a Green Climate Fund, IFAD, the Finnish government, and the Nordic Development Fund. It was at very good concessional rates. In addition to that, there's a first loss guarantee. They're putting in 90 million, but equity is putting its own 90 million as part of that blended pot. So that's what we're doing around really trying to bring the products out there, where we're putting our own money, but we're really trying to help our clients understand what they need to do in that.
Thanks for that, Reshma. And I'm not sure if the concessional funders are watching, but maybe can you also share some of the challenges, right? Because sometimes I hear it's extremely slow to get concessional finance in, and it scares away your clients. So was that all a smooth process, or?
It certainly wasn't smooth. So let me give a small example of how the process can be quite difficult. Initially, when we're going to get out the funding, our clients don't know what's happening. It's us who are having to negotiate all of that. But then it's got to a point, like for example, this particular facility is for smallholder farmers and climate adaptation. And they need it for, let's say, a 6-month cycle, and for small amounts. It could be up to $1,000. Some of the conditions that are placed on what we need to do, even to be able to lend that money, makes it not practical for those clients. So they'll say, there's too many conditions from equity. I'm going to go down the road where somebody's not going to ask me for all of that, and I'll get my money from them. So the thing we're dealing with here is a bit of a reality check on the cost it takes to actually get through the process for lending. And those costs are delays in time. And also, if you're asked to do an assessment, who's going to pay for that assessment? They don't even know if they're going to get that money or not. What we are trying to do with that is try to move some of this concessional money into, rather than transaction level assessment, can we do portfolio level assessments? Can we actually come back and do those more retrospectively over time, so we can actually allow the money to flow to where it's needed? So I think there's elements there around process and assessments. There's elements there around taxonomy in terms of what is eligible and not eligible as well. And then there's an understanding of what are the components that need to be put together in that blended pot. So those are some of the challenges we've had. The other thing I'd say is some of the people that we've spoken to around some of the blended finance would say, we understand that you have a foundation and it's not for profit, but you ultimately are a commercial group. And therefore, we will not put that money into that commercial group. So we are looking at models where we can separate out, so we can blend within one pot, but we can also take money directly into the foundation and call that the capacity building. And that forms part of kind of blended finance, that ultimately the beneficiary is the client.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. Brian, over to you, the investor on the far end.
Absolutely.
It's the same question to you, actually. Sure. Yeah.
So I'll give a little bit more detail on how the Lightsmith Group operates craft and how how it uses blended finance to be able to mobilize and really define the thematic investing theme of adaptation resilience. And we can draw some lessons for how it could be used for nature solutions, and then also how it integrates into adaptation as well. So in 2017, when our managing directors started to develop the theme around craft, helped by a $1 million grant from the GEF, adaptation was really not seen as an investable area. It was seen as infrastructure, building seawalls, but we thought that there was more to that story, and so we looked to redefine kind of how adaptation is looking, because we thought that adaptation and resilience is about building these technologies for a future that we hope to have, and dealing with the impacts of climate change that we're facing now and will be facing in the future. That's in agriculture, that's in water. These are all nature linked sectors where we need to integrate technologies to be able to help people dealing with these impacts. So Craft was designed and eventually raised $185 million utilizing multiple tiers of capital, junior level, which is the first loss risk, mainly from the public sector, which enabled us to raise the additional private sector money to reach the full capitalization for the fund. And so, that junior layer from the public sector is the blended finance that helped us to raise that money to that level. And this is really around proving the investment thesis for climate adaptation resilience, where we're looking to help users better understand the adaptation and then also respond to that. And then just alongside, just to talk about blended finance a little bit more, alongside the fund, we have a aligned technical assistance facility that helps us to deploy those technologies in vulnerable communities, least developed countries, and small island developing states. And so by making the investments where, with our fund, we're able to get a seat on the board to help the companies to amend their strategy to more align towards climate adaptation and resilience, and then also deploy those into the communities with kind of targeted deployment as well.
Thanks, Brian. But when I talk to a private investor and I say, well, you can actually develop investor projects with a return on adaptation, they laugh, right? So maybe
They certainly do, and that's why we were the first investment fund that did it.
So how did you convince them then?
Well, there were lots of conversations and certainly a lot of people who weren't interested in it. We designed the fund to kind of prove the point that you can achieve equity level returns through adaptation resilience technologies. I mean, the funders from the private sector, they're not going to give you their funds at a discount return. They need to be able to see the returns because they have to justify they're a fiduciary to the people who've invested in their funds. And so being able to define climate adaptation as we are, looking for technologies that enable the ability to engage on adaptation and resilience and engaging with nature, while having those business level returns, that's what we're looking for to be able to bring that private sector in and reach the adaptation finance gap to be able to deploy these monies. And they need to be able to see that in order to know that the solutions are actually working. It shows that it has the ability to scale.
And Brian, can you give one example of an investee, the financial stuff like ticket size, impact?
So I mean, we're a $185 million fund.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact numbers for private versus public, but we're kind of blended of public, private, and philanthropic capital. With the $185 million fund, we look for companies that have revenues $5 million in revenue a year, and we're writing ticket sizes of $15 to $20 million.
And can you give one example of a company you've invested in?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So there's a company called Way Cool Foods that's based in Chennai, India. They are an agriculture supply chain company that essentially has taken principles from the automotive manufacturing field and applying that to the food chain system in India. And so before Way Cool started working in this field, the steps from leaving the farm to the shelves of the store, it took 30 different interactions with the food in order to go through the process. By integrating this technology, they took it from 30 to 2. And then they also reduced the food wastage from about 20% to less than 1. Mm-hmm. And so by doing that, you reduce the amount of land that's needed to grow the crops because you're able to preserve more food within the system. You're able to reduce the inputs that are needed. And then it also, the company works with smallholder farmers to help them utilize climate resilient seeds and better practices so that it enters the supply chain as well. And then just the last point with climate resilience, Chennai, which just got hit by a typhoon 2 days ago. I have a colleague there who is without power and stuck in floods. Has gone through 3 climactic impacts over the last 4 years. 2 massive floods and then a drought. And within that, Wakefield Foods has been able, at least for the first two, respond to those climactic issues and still deliver food on time. They were able to get food within the system to absorb those shocks and be more resilient.
Yeah, that's a great story. Thank you. Michael, back to you. I'm doing one more round, and then I would like to invite you to come up with some questions. So we have 10 more minutes for my questions. Michael, private companies, corporate sector, blended finance, is that a world that matches? I mean, the corporates you are talking to, do they ever talk about blended finance? Is that something they see as a promise that can attract more capital to their companies to make a transition to nature positive and net zero?
I mean, the honest truth is not something that we talk about specifically, but I think increasingly the role of finance is something that cannot be ignored when you're talking about a transition. We know that we need to finance the transition towards a net zero, nature positive, and equitable future. And increasingly, companies are looking for these different solutions, of course, because of the fact that blended finance provide lower risk investments. It's also an opportunity to get large-scale investments in climate and nature. So increasingly, yes, a lot of the financial institutions that we're talking to and working with, I know, are looking at blended finance as a solution to drive up the work that they do. And I think both of you have alluded to that as well. But I think Brian made a really good point that for companies and also for investors, blended finance is not a given. At the end of the day, these are companies with fiduciary duty to stakeholders, and at the end of the day, there has to be a net positive financial gain for the business. So I think that's really one of the catalysts to make sure that we're getting businesses to leverage all of these investment opportunities that are available to get us to the end goal of a nature positive, net zero, and equitable future. But certainly, this is an area that many companies are exploring as a viable avenue to raise funds and invest in nature and climate.
Thanks. Jason, to you, the Jeff funds, how can that foster innovation in the private sector using blended finance instruments?
Okay, thank you. So as you may know, the Jeff has lots of different windows, right? The multilateral funds, of which there are a series of different ones, Green Climate Fund, Global Environment Facility, the Adaptation Fund, we each have different windows. For the Jeff, we operate on a 4-year cycle, a very purposeful strategy that operates for 4 years. For climate adaptation and resilience, one of the 3 focal areas, results areas, is actually innovation, technology, and private sector engagement, very purposefully, using precious public multilateral Jeff funds to unlock larger scale private capital. For example, creating a first loss guarantee with a bank, so they create a line of credit to help smallholder farmers transition to climate resilient, net zero, nature positive practices. So that's one window. Countries, together with Jeff agencies, of which there are 18, and WWF is a very active one, seek the funds. Each least developed country has access to $20 million. So there are 46 least developed countries in the world, $20 million, of which we encourage these type of projects to come in. Each small island developing state, large ocean state, has access to between $3 to $6.5 million, and they can pool together in regional or sub-regional projects if they would like to access. Also, another window for more middle-income country type opportunities. That's one of our main avenues. There's also a program that's I think my favorite program that I manage, my Sanity project, as I like to call it, which is called the Challenge Program for Adaptation Innovation, where we go directly to the innovators and invite them to submit their out-of-the-box, groundbreaking idea. And we've formed some really beautiful, non-traditional partnerships around often blended finance. 400 submissions in each round. so far we've received. We're hoping to do a new round in early 2024, in first quarter 2024. I hope. That's not official, likely. And we receive an avalanche of submissions, which underscores the fact that it's not a shortage of ideas to catalyze innovation in private sector engagement and adaptation, resilience, and nature-based solutions. The challenges lie elsewhere. Those are a few of the key windows. There's also a blended finance facility of the GEF. It's called the Non-Grant Instrument, NGI. Happy to talk to anybody about details if you'd like.
Thanks, Jason. And Reshma, she mentioned that sometimes she deploys blended finance vehicles not at the transaction level, but she's pooling them. Is that something Jeff is also doing? Like you provide your blended finance instruments and then allowing the recipient to on-lend that in multiple transactions, or is it always transaction by transaction? No, that's a question for you, Jason. Right.
I thought we moved on. Okay, I'm sorry.
So the Jeff blended finance support.
Yes.
Is that always at a transaction level, or can it also be done at the pool level? So your bank gets a blended first loss junior tranche from Jeff.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, often it's at the pooled level. It's for efficiencies, and I think that's the case with the Craft Fund. Another similar fund is called the Landscape Resilience Fund, which has an initial capitalization of 25 million. We put in 1 million for that. Conservation International is running an adaptation accelerator program. The Catalyst Fund, powered by BFA Global in fintech for nature-based solutions and adaptation resilience, which is more of an early stage, because innovation and blend is on a continuum, right? It's on a continuum from smaller to larger businesses. Catalyst Fund's larger. The Craft is larger. Catalyst Fund is smaller. But those are all aggregators. I mean, yeah. It's often an efficiency scale.
All right. Sorry for surprising you. Reshma, over to you. So you were talking about thousands of clients, so there's a big need for concessional finance and blended instruments. So, but probably the size that is currently existing is not big enough to cater all your clients. So what is needed to unlock the full potential of blended finance and to help your clients to deliver their transition plans?
So before I talk about what's needed, if I could just add on the return on the private sector that we talked about earlier. If people are putting in money into a fund, at least the investors know they're directly putting into a fund that's going to be on lend for a specific purpose. When we're a commercial bank like ourselves, a lot of the funding comes from depositors. So that adds another layer of complexity, because you have to give a certain percentage on fixed deposits, but also the depositors want their money back. They don't want any risk associated with that. And that results in some of the challenges that we're facing and why we need that concessional money. But what is it going to take to unblock? A lot of times what it takes is a pipeline. A lot of the times we're told the issue is bankable projects, and if we had the bankable projects, the supply side is there. You just need to match the demand and supply side. Sitting here today, I mean, I look at the projection of what I have for next year, and I have a whole series of bankable projects. On the larger side and a lot of the renewable side, because we do large corporates, on the pilots that we're running on the small whole size. I mean, I can give somebody a whole, this is how much we need in these areas, in these countries. So the issue necessarily is not just the bankable projects. The issue, I think, in terms of challenging is some of the things around the term of the loan. So we have, for example, the moratoriums over a certain period. We're told these loans you can on lend for 7 years, or they're rotational. But some of the larger projects that like renewables, you're looking at a 20-year term. So when you talk about concessional amounts on those, there's an element there around that aspect. There's an element around capacity building. And some of the ones that we're negotiating now come with technical assistance. And the whole idea there is to prepare the demand side for them to understand what exactly is needed as well. So those are some of the challenges that we're seeing on the ground. But also regulation is another challenge for us, because at the moment, what is driving the demand side? There isn't a lot on the regulation side. A lot of it is actually being driven by a need that the financial institutions are helping people identify that need as well. And I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to stop there. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Brian, is there anything you would like to add on that matter?
I think we can just move to questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Any question? Sorry? 20, yeah. Yeah, please go ahead. How does that work? Is there
I'll share.
Great, that's very kind, thank you. Aaron, I think you mentioned in your introduction, you quoted the Convergence report, which shows that the total volume of blended finance has halved between 2021 and 2022. And I'm trying to reconcile that with your third reason for optimism, Jason, which, if I remember correctly, is that the growing number of blended finance models is a reason for hope. So, question to you, Jason, is it the proliferation of the model types that you think is going to help us reverse the trend on overall volume, or perhaps there's something you'd like to build on a little bit further? Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, do you want to do one, or do you want to take a few questions?
Yeah. How many people? How many questions are there?
Yeah, so my question is slightly different. So I work for Deloitte, so we're working perhaps at the other end of the spectrum, or maybe the spectrum's a circle. But as I'm listening to you, I'm just asking myself a question. When you're making decisions about investments, have you thought about the role of business to actually help scale up the startups that you're investing in, almost use them as security, so that you can actually make them more attractive to investors, so that you can get the pipeline? Because it's fascinating with the regulation in this respect. I think is our friend, because it's driving companies to report, and as soon as they report, they actually get to understand what it is they do, and then as soon as they understand what they do, they can actually intervene, and then they will ask for lots of the things that you're investing in. And I'm just wondering whether there's a way of squaring the circle, I suppose.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Well, let's start with your question first. Jason, do you have any thoughts on that? You had some time to think now.
Yeah, it's an interesting and a challenging one. I am seeing a lot of movement on especially blended finance investment funds and investment vehicles and bonds. We're hearing a lot more about bonds coming online for adaptation and resilience. At the same time, and you'll hear it from a lot of people in the space of blended finance, it's gotten very challenging lately. Some of that is driven by interest rates, and Aaron is actually more of a specialist to talk about that part of it, and especially recently, and that's especially impacting net zero and mitigation finance. But the growing sophistication and movement, especially for nature-based investment opportunities, and part of this is policy-driven, and the great breakthrough of the Montreal Kunming Protocol. Now we have the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund that's sort of starting to give signals. So I think there's a very mixed answer that needs more analysis there, and
Yeah.
I invite Aaron, you to come in as well.
Maybe I can add to that as well. I mean, if you look at the Convergence report, you see that the volume in dollar terms has halved. The volume in number of projects is stable, right? So it's just also smaller ticket sizes. So yeah, there's also some economic reasons why the volume in dollar terms has gone down. So foreign exchange risks, interest rates, so that all didn't help last year. But I mean, your question to Jason on the number of accelerators, these pool types of blended finance instruments, they indeed have proliferated. And I think that is one, key to get more blended finance out of the door, because the first 5 years of blended finance, so 2015 to 2020, there was a lot of focus on structuring blended finance deals, so a little bit structuring funds, and not so much on origination and pipeline development. And I think all the funds that you mentioned have a lot of focus on pipeline development with TA, equity type of instruments, and I think that needs to grow, and the WF has been involved in the DFCD, which is now a 1.3 billion blended finance instrument with over 100 companies. So that model can be replicated, but I think we're all a little bit working in isolation, so we're not talking to Acumen, we're not talking to the LRF. So I think we also now get some of these incubators together. Yeah. Who would like to respond? Yeah.
Yeah. So when we talk about disclosure and increased disclosure, I think we need to look at where we are, where we operate. There's very limited disclosure at the moment. So the Nairobi Stock Exchange issued guidelines in 2021 to follow GRI. The Central Bank of Kenya issued guidelines on the TCFD in 2021 as well, and then Tanzania in 2022. And that's probably the only kind of jurisdiction requirement. Those regulations were issued. We were the only bank that actually met them, and there are 44 banks in the region. So disclosure is a problem, and it focuses a lot on the listed. But what will help beyond disclosure is, I'd say, supply chain, value chain. Because where people are looking to import or export, I should say, into a value chain, then if regulations are elsewhere, they're requiring the whole value chain to be looked at. So that is really helping it perforate. But the other thing that is helping, and what we use, is ecosystem banking. So we would use like an anchor, and then we would look around that anchor, who's impacted, and we would use that to build capacity. So that's how we use that to kind of build either a region, a sector, or a value chain in terms of building that. So I think those will be the ones that will drive change.
Can you explain that a little bit more, how that works?
Okay, so for example, in the agricultural sector, you might have an aggregator. And the aggregator buys from smallholder farmers and then does some processing. But because you focus on that particular one, you understand, one, where they're buying from, how much they're buying. That allows you to be able to lend to the smaller farmers, that allows you to use the aggregator to pass on the technical assistance. But more than that, it allows you to look at the shared services that are required for that aggregator, and whether that's irrigation, whether that's organic fertilizer. That's just an agriculture example that allows that. You can do the same for manufacturing and distribution networks. You can do the same for in terms of like off-grid power, but those are that we're using. We're using one big company, and then we're looking at who their customer base are, who their distribution networks are, and we're bringing that all under one pool.
Right, that's interesting. And sometimes do these aggregators also on land with your capital? Is that also a model?
They do. They do run their own land, but they also are very good at running pilots as well as part of that, which builds that. So they themselves are running their businesses, but they might have 50% of their supply coming from around them.
Thank you. Any reflections from the
Sure,
panel?
I can add to how we look at metrics as well. So we have a full, we see impact and return as inextricably linked, and we do report on that, on returns and impact for our companies to our investors every year. We also have a fully integrated ESMS reporting system that we've developed around climate adaptation, aligning with IFC performance standards. And then we also are able to work with the companies to improve their internal metrics reporting so that then they can, like you said, know what they're actually selling and then, respond to that to their customers and then their other investors as well. So I think it's a really important piece that is, being able to define and show your impact to really grow this space. So defining the metrics, I think, is an important aspect to develop, especially with nature-based solutions for the future.
Hi, my name is Martin Geiger. I'm Director of ESG and Impact and Climate at DEG, a daughter of KfW banking group, investing in developing and emerging markets. We have a co-investment in the Livelihood Carbon Fund with GEF. Thank you. A question comes to my mind if I hear that kind of blended finance. Why should I invest if there is no carbon certificates in there? So I think in terms of nature positive, I think the main attraction for us investing into that space is in fact to at least to have a portion of our investment being helping us moving towards carbon neutrality as a financial institution. But it was not kind of very much highlighted in the discussion right now. Is there a reason for that, that this was not covered, or you wanted to avoid that, or kind of too much criticism coming from the Netherlands, from some scientists there? What was the reason?
No, I mean, I'm completely open to carbon credits. From the accelerators that we are running, it's often a very important part of the revenue stream for the company. With the sales of extra carbon credits, it can make the business case go round and have a good risk return profile for the blended finance investor. So from my end, I'm definitely very much pro thinking about high quality carbon credits. Merge that, right, with blended finance. But do you have ideas around that?
Yeah, I don't think it was purposeful to avoid carbon credits. And by the way, we're happy to talk about biodiversity credits as well, right? And hey, let's talk about climate resilience credits as well and get our heads around that one. I want to come back to the point on indicators and metrics because it's fundamental. If we're not rigorous and serious about our metrics, and this relates to carbon credits, of course, then we're greenwashing or climate washing. We have to be serious, and we need to see both science-based, rigorous, and usable metrics, and increasingly driving to consolidation of commonality in the space. Right now in the adaptation and resilience space, we were just talking about it yesterday, we're seeing 1,000 flowers blooming on different metric system, and on one hand that's good, but we need to see more consolidation. We're working with UNEP-FI on community of action, we've called it, for consolidating and increasing the rigor, so that we're looking at risk, but also opportunity of investing in impact, opportunity of investing in nature and resilience and net zero. Maybe I'll pause there.
All right. Michael, you want to come in?
Maybe just quickly to actually reiterate some of the things that I said in the beginning, that ultimately all of this is to address the three challenges of climate, nature, and people. And of course, the carbon credits conversation is around how do we balance out emissions and get towards a state of net zero. So by no means was that, an omission on purpose. But I think one thing about carbon credits that we need to also be quite upfront and frank about when we're having these discussions is that it's something that should not be sort of the first solution. We need to respect the mitigation hierarchy when we're looking at the solutions that is going to get us there, right? We need to do everything that we're doing to make sure that we're reducing emissions as much as we can, and then leveraging the power of carbon credits and offsetting to help us bridge that gap towards a net zero future. So yeah, there's a lot of work that's going on to make sure that, the models are really amplified on what is helping us reduce emissions, and then really what we can't, we work on offsets and carbon credits. And I think, yeah, that's really the message of how we use those to help us get to a net zero future.
Great, thanks, Michael. Is there any, David, please.
Yes, I guess my question might be mostly for you, Michael. I'm David McCauley. Among other hats I wear as the chair of the Climate Investment Fund's independent expert group for nature, people, and climate. Since you just said those three words, I'll back. And I'm just wondering, I looked a bit at your handbook, and to me, it's focused on materiality questions, which is appropriate, but it seems very geared towards climate mitigation and greenhouse gas emission reduction. And maybe that's just my impression. Can you say you're surrounded by folks who are working in the climate adaptation investment space? Maybe you could say a word or two about how that applies. Thank you.
Well, so the handbook itself, which we developed to support the Now for Nature campaign that I mentioned earlier, it's actually not climate focused, it's nature focused, and climate is a part of that. So when we're talking about assessing impacts and dependencies, we're looking at the whole nature system, which climate is a part of.
Is that correct, or is that just an impression?
I would actually not say so, because a lot of the reason we did that work was we did some analysis with CDP around company action on nature, and the number of companies that are disclosing on climate versus the number of companies that CDP does not have a nature questionnaire, but the different elements on nature, whether it's forest, freshwater, and we realized a huge disparity in the number of companies that are disclosing on climate versus those that are disclosing on nature. So there's actually quite a lot of focus on the nature impacts and dependencies and how we can work with companies to make sure that we're bridging that gap and getting action on nature. And I'm happy to talk to you more about that as well.
All right. Okay. Then I'll give the floor to the panelists for a very quick last word. Anything that's burning that you want to share before we all go to the next panels? Jason?
We have. I'm gonna take a page out of the book. The world's burning. We're in crisis. We need to move a lot faster. We need to analyze. We need to be strategic, and we need to go a hell of a lot quicker. And we need to be bold. We need to take risks. We need to be able to risk failing sometimes, and yeah, not hold back.
I couldn't have put it better. I think that's the key thing. Moving faster means less blockages, taking on a bit more risk, and supporting for the ones who can take the risk, being able to support the ones that can't take the risk. And sometimes, for me, the way I look at it, it's not about necessarily getting people on board with the agenda. It's more getting people on board with the impact of what we're trying to drive. And if we can achieve that, then I'm okay with that to be about pure financing rather than them worrying about nature and climate, as long as they're understanding the impact is on nature, climate, and people. So that's my key takeaway from that.
Yeah, I think every time I'm in a conversation like this with a lot of finance experts, the word that keeps coming up so much is the word risk. And I think in the last 10 seconds between the two of you, you said risk like maybe 15 times or 10 times. But just to conclude, I think the biggest risk that we have now is the risk of inaction, right? The world is burning, like you said. We need to start acting now. So let's not wait for everything to be in place. Let's not let perfect be the enemy of the good. We need to start acting with what we have now and evolve with the best practices as they come.
And so I would say that for nature-based solutions, we should take a page from the lessons that we learned in building the sector around climate adaptation and resilience investing. We need to establish a common language so that investors who are not in the space of conservation and nature-based solutions can understand on their terms what the impact is, but also what the return is. Because that's the only reason they're going to come into this fight with you, is because if they understand it from their point of view as well. And so I would say pushing more towards developing the metrics, but also developing the standards of the definitions of how to talk to it. And that's how we go faster, is by having the foundation to cultivate the environment for the finance to come in, which then is catalytic and will accelerate the scale up.
Thank you. Well, then, on my behalf, you heard the invitation, also at Climate COP, from the mainstream global asset owners and asset managers to work with us, the blended finance experts, to get more money out of the door. I mean, we had 8 years to think about what are the risks and what are the obstacles and what we need. So we need more lenient, agile development finance institutions that deploy capital quicker. I think we need global companies that also think about long-term offtake agreements so they can give some security to the suppliers in the global south. So we have a whole ecosystem of things that need to happen. But I fully agree with you, Michael. Now it's not time to continue talking about it, but let's do it. So give a round of applause to the great panel. And thank you for coming.